Friends, go ahead and find a seat as you're able to, because we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, welcome to HEA. I'm Rabbi Sarah Shulman, and I am so delighted to be joined up on the bima today by a wonderful individual, an incredible writer, and a truly prophetic voice, I think, as Yossi Klein Halevi, who I was sitting with here just a couple months ago, is how he describes Sarah Hurwitz. And I think that's such a wonderful, I mean, it's like that's a big lift, right?
I don't know about that.
And humble, apparently, too. But we're so delighted that Sarah is joining us tonight, and what incredible timing. Her book, As a Jew, which will have sale afterwards for $25 in the lobby afterwards, and yes, she can sign it if you want, just came out last week, and so probably most of you, unless those voracious readers among us, may not have had a chance to read it, but we're really looking forward to learning more about the book and her perspective throughout tonight. I had the pleasure of meeting Sarah a number of years ago in Aspen when she was working on her first book, and I remember at the time when I first met her, we did some Torah study together, and I was, wow, this woman is really something. She is so sharp and quick, and just everything she says seems to speak to this moment. And so I think in a time where it's been a tough past week for those of us that live here in Colorado and in this country, a week of violence, a week where we really need community and hope and connection to other people in the Jewish community. I can think of no other person that could be more delighted to sit with tonight. So please give a warm welcome to Sarah Hurwitz.
Thank you.
And I want to say a big thank you to Barb and Jason Carroll for sponsoring tonight's program.
Thank you, guys.
We're going to do a conversation, really more of an interview, but a conversation between the two of us. And then we'll have an opportunity to take some questions. There's note cards in the lobby and pencils if you'd like to write very legibly, I might ask, a question if you have a question you'd like to ask her, something you think she could uniquely speak to, we'll take some questions at the end, and then she'll be around afterwards if you have anything you'd like to share, a cousin that might be related to her, or any other Jewish geography or anything else. On one condition, though, you're not allowed to try to set her up, though. We might have a few Jewish moms in the room, and that's the one thing that is off limits tonight. Sarah's been very gracious to say that we can ask her anything, so I think that's real testament to who she is. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about Jewish things and obviously your book, but I'd love to actually start in your time. You spent a long time in politics and specifically as a speechwriter in the White House. So tell us a little bit about your experience in the White House so we can get to know that side of you. You could even share a few war stories with us. We'd love to hear what you have to say.
I would love to do that. And I just want to say, I am blown away. It is a Sunday night, and to see this many people coming out, I mean, talk about a vibrant community, and knowing your rabbi, I'm not surprised. Like meeting Rabbi Shulman years ago, I was like, oh, this woman is special. Just like everything she said, I was like, ooh, that's deep. Or like, ooh, I'm like, let her again. Yeah, I really am. So I'm both delighted and not surprised that this is such a vibrant community, knowing that who you have at your helm. So, and I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you again to the Carrolls for sponsoring this. It's really, Very special to be here. So the White House, I worked there for 8 years in the Obama administration, and you really never have the day you think you're going to have. It is always a little bit wild. You know, as a speechwriter, sometimes you're writing, sometimes you're editing, sometimes you're meeting with your boss. And, you know, I worked most of the time for Michelle Obama, and she really knew who she was and what she wanted to say. So, you know, she would download a bunch of ideas, themes, paragraphs of language. I would rearrange it into a speech. We would go back and forth. It was a very elaborate process. But I'll say I worked for President Obama for 2 years, and I will tell one story about that. Back in 2009, I wrote his first college graduation speech, which was at Arizona State University. And we met with him several weeks in advance, and he was a little distracted because the economy was crashing. You'll remember 2009, not a great time. He was really focused on that and not on college graduation speeches. So, you know, he gave me an idea. He said, this is what I want to talk about. You know, said a few things and just kind of left it. I was like, okay. So I wrote him the speech I thought he wanted, and I handed it in a week early, very proud of myself, and I heard nothing. So I thought, like, all right, must have nailed it. The morning of the speech, I get a call from the Oval Office saying, the president wants to see you right away. I was like, he is not calling me in there to be like, nice job, champ, you nailed it, Tiger. Like, that's not what's happening. So I like rush in, and I'm like, there's like the White House photographers take photos of all meetings the president has with anyone. And so the meetings that day are of him looking very crisp and commanding and me looking totally bedraggled, like I've just like been hit by a bus. And in those pictures, he looks very calm, but what he's saying to me is, this is not the speech I want to give. He was like, look, I'm so sorry. I didn't get to look at this till late last night, but just not the speech I want to give today, by the way. I was like, oh, okay. And you can't be like, are you out of your mind? I was like, oh, sir, no problem. You know, please tell me, what would you like to do? And he dictates an entirely different speech, just different topic, totally different. And I'm thinking like, we're literally getting on a plane in like 4 hours to go to this speech. So I run back to my office. I'm rewriting, I'm panicking. My colleagues are trying to help me. A few hours later, I get him a new draft, and he's like, okay, it's a good start, but not quite there. I'm like, oh no. So I run back, I'm rewriting, and I call our schedulers. I'm like, I'm gonna miss the motorcade, the cars that take staff from the White House to Andrews Air Force Base, where you catch Air Force One. And they said, no problem, we'll get you on the helicopter on Marine One, which leaves right before the plane takes off, which was cool. So I'm still writing and writing. It's time to go. I like run out to the South Lawn with my laptop open. I have like papers trailing behind me. I'm so panicked. We get on the helicopter. I'm like hunched over trying to work on the speech, which is awkward because Marine One is tiny inside and my knees are almost touching the president. So it's very awkward. I'm hunched over writing it. And as we fly over the Washington Mall, he looks over at me and he goes, hey, what are you doing? I was like, sir, I'm working on this speech. And he goes, hey. You know what? You don't get to do something like this every day. Look out, enjoy the view. Because he knew I was this mid-level staffer who was never getting on that helicopter again, which was true. That was my one helicopter ride in 8 years. It's you can see why so many of us stayed all 8 years. That was like a really kind thing for him to do. So we get on the plane, still rewriting the speech, which is just bonkers. And the computers on Air Force One back in 2009 were very slow. They actually had a keystroke delay. So you would press a key, and a second later, the letter would appear on the screen, which was like, I'm just like panicking, trying to rewrite this. We land, the printer is taking forever. Our trip director was like, get off the plane, the cars are leaving, get off the plane, and I'm still trying to print. We get in the motorcade, and he's still rewriting this. Like, I'm still getting edits on my phone, and I'm thinking like, this is a disaster. So we just get there, and I'm thinking like, okay, it doesn't have to be good, just has to be done. I'm just gonna get through this and hopefully not get fired, and I'm just dreading this. But the man steps up to the podium and delivers that speech like he's been delivering it for the past 50 years. Just like flawless. He's emotional. The students are crying. They're laughing. It's this like beautiful day. And I'm like, we wrote that thing in like 3 different moving vehicles. It was so wild. So he finishes, standing ovation. We get back into the motorcade, drive back to the plane. We're on the plane. He kind of strides down the aisle. He was like, hey, I think it went pretty well, huh? It's like, yeah, sir, that was a delay. It's never do that again. So never have the day you think you're gonna have.
Wow.
Thank you. I do deserve some applause for surviving that.
Okay, so you spent 8 years in the White House, and then you wrote a book about Judaism, which is not exactly what we'd expect.
You don't think it's like the normal next step?
Probably
no?
would expect. So catch us up. And by the way, a wonderful book. Her first book, Here All Along, is a wonderful book for a really wide, I've heard from conversion students, I've heard people who were born Jewish, old, young, in between, a really wonderful, wonderful book. But tell us how you fell in love with Judaism.
That's exactly. There really was a love letter to Judaism. I mean, I grew up maybe like some of you, where Judaism for me was like, 3 boring holidays and 1 fun one, Hanukkah. It was, 2 texts, like prayer book in the hand, Torah on the scrolls, no idea, really couldn't understand either of them, and Hebrew school, which I didn't like. And, after I became a bat mitzvah, I just thought like, I'm good. I think I'll just sort of gently tiptoe away from this. And I was pretty disengaged until my mid-30s when I broke up with a guy I was dating, and I was very lonely and anxious and just looking to fill my time. And I happened to hear about an Intro to Judaism class at the local JCC, and it really could have been like a karate class. I mean, it could have been anything.
Just think if every Jewish heartbroken girl did the same thing.
I'm just saying. I mean, it was totally normal thing to do. So I was like, fine, I would always say I'm a cultural Jew. I knew nothing about Jewish culture, of course, but I said I should know about my culture. And so I took this class, and I was just blown away. We were studying these Jewish texts, and I was like, this is 4,000 years of wisdom about what it means to be human, like what it means to be a good person and live a worthy life and be a good parent, child, friend, sibling, spouse, employee, community member. And I just thought, like, where has this been all my life? And so I took another intro class, and I started learning and reading and studying, and I just thought, like, I want to tell other Jews about this. It's really important to me to share this because I didn't see any of this. If you're a Jew like me whose only point of contact with Judaism is a couple of synagogue services twice a year and like a Hanukkah party, why would you know it has wisdom for every moment of your life? I had no idea. And so I really wanted to share that with others. And it really was a book that I meant it for disengaged Jews like me. But I think what surprised me is the number of very traditional observant Jews, like including Chabad rabbis, who were like, this book is for me. I was like, nope, definitely it was not for you. But, they said actually like, no, I don't necessarily agree with everything you write. I practice pretty differently from you, but I see your love for this tradition. You had some fresh insights about it that made me sort of fall more in love with it. And I saw your 550 endnotes, so I see that you did your homework. Like, you took this seriously. And I was very moved by that. Like, that was just to connect with such a diversity of Jews from across the country, across the spectrum of observance, was really just a great experience.
I've read both your books, and including the new one, and the tone is different in the second book. It's got an edge to it. You've referred to your first book as sort of a love letter to Judaism, and the second one more of a polemic. I'm wondering if you can tell us about that shift. How much is that related to what was going on in you and what had changed, and how much is it about the Jewish world, or what was that shift?
So a few things happened between my last book and this one. The first is that I trained to be a volunteer hospital chaplain during COVID. And, chaplaincy, let's just pause for a minute. Like, people are like, you're still Jewish, right? Like, it's a very Christian word, even though it's ostensibly interfaith. You have chaplains of every religious tradition, and you have atheist chaplains as well, but it's called chaplaincy. And once I got there, we were talking about our ministry and our theology and our faith. And I was told that, like, prayer is, God, please heal so-and-so who's right here in front of me as I make this prayer up totally spontaneously, personalizing it for her. It's just not written down, which is beautiful. That's a great way to pray. But like, I wouldn't say that's a very common form of Jewish prayer. You don't often see Jews praying that way. And when I would tell my instructors that's not really universal prayer, they were like, yes, it is. As long as you don't say Jesus, it's not Christian. I thought and they really wouldn't listen to me when I tried to explain. I began to realize how growing up soaked in a Christian country, just how much that had kind of warped my idea of Jewishness. Even the idea of spirituality, I'd always thought it was like our bodies are carnal, materialist, kind of gross, and there is a heavenly spiritual realm, and the goal of spirituality is to transcend this carnal, gross body for this beautiful spirit realm. That's not a Jewish idea. Once you study, read the Torah. We care a lot about our bodies, how we treat our bodies. Our bodies are sacred. There isn't a degradation of the body in Judaism. There isn't that body-soul duality. But I just assumed that that's what all spirituality was. And there were so many things like that. So that got me thinking. I also visited a college campus maybe a year before October 7th. And I was talking to students at the Hillel. And I did my whole shtick about how great Judaism is. It was all very upbeat. And at the end, this young woman raised her hand and she said, so what did you do about Judaism? And she said, so what did you do about anti-Semitism when you were in college? And I literally said, what? Like, I actually had to ask her to repeat the question because I didn't comprehend it. Because I was like, I went during the 1990s and early 2000s, I went to college and law school, and in 7 years, never once did I feel in any way uncomfortable as a Jew. I was so stunned by this. I was like, I'm sorry, does anyone else have this concern here? And so many of the kids raised their hands and started sharing stories. And I thought, like, wait a second, something's really off here. And I was also post-Gaza War 2021, seeing a lot of discourse about Israel that I really perceived as hateful and kind of anti-Semitic. I was like, something is happening here. And I began really reflecting on my Jewish identity for most of my life, which was this really apologetic, kind of shame-based, like embarrassed Jewish identity. It was, I'm Jewish, but I'm not that Jewish. I'm just a cultural Jew. Which, look, if you connect to Judaism through Jewish culture, through history, thought, language, literature, art, food, that's beautiful. Like, what a profound way to be a Jew. I knew none of that. I just meant I like Seinfeld and I was kind of funny, right? Or I said, like, I'm an ethnic Jew, which again, Jews are of many different ethnicities. So that's sort of saying, like, I have a race. It's like, okay, well, that's sort of a meaningless statement, and I didn't really mean anything by it. Or I said, social justice is my Judaism. Which again, if you're a Jew who really understands what Jewish tradition says about social justice and you really work to enact that in your life, beautiful. I knew nothing about what Judaism said about social justice. Or I said, like, I remember the Holocaust, which, I mean, what a stupid Jewish identity, right? I remember people tried to kill us, like, that's the whole Jewish identity. And I began to wonder, like, where did that come from? And, the question I'd asked previously, like, where has this been all my life? It actually became more of a serious question, like, wait, where has Judaism been all my life? Why was the Judaism I grew up with so oddly edited that I only saw these few little snapshots of it and didn't really see the bulk of the tradition? Like, what had happened?
Okay, and then you went about it like a speechwriter, which means you probably read, 200 books and articles, and that really comes through in the book. So tell us a little bit about the unfolding, what you discovered, and what is this book about for you?
Yeah, what I discovered was that my Jewish identity, and I think the Jewish identity of many American Jews, has been very much infiltrated and warped by 2,000 years of anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism, and by 200 years of Jews in a very understandable and I think often well-intentioned and often quite courageous effort to escape that persecution, erasing themselves, assimilating, trying to take advantage of the opportunities of the modern world by leaving behind aspects of their traditions that the people around them found disgusting. And I began to realize kind of almost like the spiritual erasure that my ancestors had undergone in order to try to fit in. And I realized how much had been lost and how many layers of shame and self-hatred and internalized anti-Semitism I had. And this book was really my effort to kind of really track them through history, like what had actually happened to my ancestors and what had been handed down to me. How do I strip those layers away, and how do I turn to tradition, looking at it through a Jewish lens, through an open-hearted, curious, loving lens, and really reclaim Judaism on Jewish terms? So that's kind of that's the book. It is a bit edgier than my first one, which was really it really was a love letter, and this is really more of a polemic.
And in many ways, that's what makes it also speak so poignantly to this moment. I was writing a Heartbeat, which is sort of an article to the congregation yesterday, and I talked about wake-up calls a little bit, and I called you a spiritual whistleblower.
Oh,
because I think there's all different ways that we need to be kind of waking up to what it means to be a Jew in America today. And I think you have a lot to say about that from a really interesting and very relatable perspective. So let's go a little bit more into the specifics of the book. You wrote that for much of your life, you thought anti-Semitism was a mystery, and that it was, and I quote, an eternal, inexplicable phenomenon that has always existed in the world. But why did you think that? I wonder, and when you studied the history of anti-Semitism in all those hundreds of books that you read and articles, what did you find? And what did you find that changed you or surprised you?
So I was one of the many young people for whom my anti-Semitism education was actually just Holocaust education. So in 8th grade, I learned that, the Germans lost World War I and they blamed the Jews. And then there was the Depression and they blamed the Jews and then they killed them all. And it's like, okay, well, why? Because of prejudice and scapegoating. And I was like, okay, yeah, makes sense. I never thought to ask why. It's like, why the Jews? It's like, because of prejudice and scapegoating. Like, okay, interesting. But again, why the prejudice and scapegoating? That's what we're learning about. But the reality is the actual answer to the question of why the Germans and Europeans killed the Jews, the answer is 2,000 years of Christian anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism, which is not an answer you can give in an American public school in a country where people get upset when you say Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas, right? Like, this is kind of the reality, and this is not my brilliant insight. This is actually the work of many really distinguished Christian scholars who I quote heavily in this book, who really trace they basically trace the Holocaust back to early Christianity, where early Christianity very much defined itself against Judaism. The New Testament was an argument between two groups of Jews. They parted ways. And, early Christian leaders were really trying to define this new religion and kind of trying to get people to stop also practicing Judaism. There were a lot of people who were doing both, and they really wanted a clean break. And so, they came up with this idea of Jews as extremely powerful, like supernaturally, preternaturally powerful and threatening, incredibly depraved, really diabolical, evil, devilish, and in a conspiracy to harm people. So power, depravity, and conspiracy. And you really see these ideas just winding their way through the Christian world for 2,000 years, and they morph, they change, they take on different forms, but they really do, as these Christian scholars, again, I really give credit to them, they really do eventually lead to the kind of thought that undergirded the Holocaust. And, these ideas also found their way into the Muslim world, where, Jews in Islam were really considered second-class citizens, but they were kind of a protected status. Jews and Christians, they were considered dhimmis, protected citizens, but they were really, it was sort of like a Jim Crow situation where they were kind of segregated. There was a lot of prejudice, but probably a little bit better than the Christian world, but not that much better. But Jews there were considered more pathetic, weak, kind of almost laughable. But as Christian ideas through colonization made their way into the Muslim world, then you start to get these same tropes about Jewish power and depravity and conspiracy, and which leads to some of the modern Islamist anti-Semitism we see today. And all along, as I was reading this, I was like, this is not a mystery. Right? As a kid, I just thought wow, so mysterious. It's like anti-Semitism. Who knows where it comes from? I'm like, I can show you where it comes from. Actually, it's right here in history. And I think because we don't teach our kids that history, they either think it's a mystery or even worse, they think, well, Jews must have done something to deserve this, right? It can't just be this random thing. And that's a real problem.
Some of the most powerful parts of the book for me were your personal stories. That's always, when I'm a reader, I don't know if any of you are that way. I love memoirs. I like really the personalizing, hearing about how you were a hospital chaplain and both the challenges that you faced working with the other chaplains and those you encountered with, but also the power of healing, the moments where you would touch. There's a beautiful story in the book in which you sort of are in a woman's room and you sort of pulling from a story from the Talmud in which one rabbi touches another rabbi's, and it's a moment of healing. You're sort of channeling this story in your own, and clearly this book operates on multiple levels. There's sort of a historical level to it. There's a present-day anti-Semitism, the college tour, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how what you discovered also shaped your Jewish identity. I noticed that when I picked you up at the airport today, Sarah was wearing a T-shirt that said Berkeley Hillel in Hebrew, and my first reaction was like, oh wow, that's bold. I'm not sure I'd want to travel with that shirt in today's world. And then I sort of caught myself, right, in the same way that we have those moments. Should I hang a Jewish flag outside my door? Yes, I want to. We have a family over there who has had people tear down their Israeli flag multiple times from their front yard. And I'm just wondering about how this book and your research has changed the way that you carry your own Judaism and view your own Jewish identity.
Yeah, there's a piece of the history that I think is relevant to that answer, which is that, in Western Europe in the early 1800s, when Jews were finally allowed to be citizens of their countries, something called the Emancipation, they had to figure out how to be Jews in the modern world, because prior to the 1800s, Jews lived in these very insular Jewish communities. You lived by a Jewish calendar and Jewish law and spoke Jewish languages, and suddenly you can go to universities and do secular professions. And these Jews, they wanted to stay Jewish, but they wanted to fit in too. And so they were very courageous in wanting to stay Jewish, but in wanting to fit in many ways, they almost kind of took a Protestant cookie cutter and jammed it into Judaism and got rid of what didn't fit. So, it's like, oh, they have a church, we have a Jew church, which we're going to make look like their church with, stained glass and pretty things and everything. They have 4 holidays, we have 4 holidays. They worship God, we worship God. And that entire, post-biblical textual tradition, 2,500 years of Jewish text, commentary, debate that really are the beating heart of Judaism, we're just going to downplay that, right? We're going to just focus on the Bible and say we're prophetic Jews and all of that. And, I respect the courage in them wanting to stay Jewish, but there was such a loss there. And I think today, as I think about being a Jew, it's so important to me to reclaim that, to reclaim those 2,500 years of Jewish wisdom and to kind of announce myself as a Jew. This is why anytime I travel, I generally wear one of my many Hillel t-shirts, which has the name of the university in Hebrew, because it's just a great way for me to find my people. Like in airports, people will just walk up to me and they'll be like, I was wearing my Michigan one, it said Michigan in Hebrew. It's a year or two ago. All right, go blue, thank you. A woman just walks up to me, doesn't say hello, doesn't introduce herself, and she goes, can you believe what happened at that honors convocation where the protesters interrupted? And I was like, oh, hello. And I was wearing my Berkeley one another time, and this guy came up to me, goes, hey, that's a lonely t-shirt, man. I just thought it was like... So I don't know, but I also understand when people don't feel safe doing that, right? I don't shame anyone for saying like, not a good idea right now, right? I want us to keep ourselves safe, right? So it's really, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do this. It is a Jewish value to protect your life. So I actually strongly urge people to protect their lives. And I think if you do feel like it's okay and safe for you to do so, I do think there's a real joy in it. It's a way for me to meet my people wherever I am, and I feel kind of more and more committed to that, knowing what was lost and knowing that I have the privilege of reclaiming it.
Yeah, and I think, people are all making their own decisions, and it's
Totally.
These personal decisions about when do we show up outwardly facing Jewish and proudly doing so. We had Shai Davidai up here on the Bima last year too, and he spoke about how we bought a Star of David after October 7th. And he went on Amazon, and that was one of the things he did to show himself. And I noticed that it inspired one of my confirmation students, my 10th graders, to do the same, right? And we want our young people to be proudly Jewish, especially because, a lot of their life has been since October 7th, a time when it has been difficult to feel comfortable in to be a Jewish student in public high schools. I hear that all the time from our students. And they feel it, whether it's college campuses or high schools or just in the gyms working out. As I talked to someone here this week, it can be a tough world, and we all experience that. And yet we just have these moments to be able to be ambassadors in the same way you're saying for Judaism, and also to connect to that person who's sitting in the lobby that can read your t-shirt with their elementary Hebrew, right?
And sometimes I'm surprised. I was wearing my Bring Them Home t-shirt when I was at University of Texas, Dallas, and I was just at some random roadside diner getting some food, and I thought no one will recognize this here. But I got up to the front of the line, and the cashier, her face her eyes opened wide, and she said, "Oh my God, do you have family there? Do you have loved ones there?" I was like, "Oh, you recognize this?" I said, "Well, I do have people I love there," and she was like, "Oh." I have been praying for it. I've been praying for them, my church. And the other cashier came over. He was like, I've always wanted to visit. It was just this moment of it was, where I'd been a little bit nervous, and there was this moment of welcome. It was like, oh, okay, you can be surprised.
Yeah. We had a church drop off a basket and these bracelets that said, "You're not alone," after October 7th, which was a nice message to get. Let's talk a little bit about post-October 7th, which is, of course, the time period in which you wrote this book. I'd love to hear a little bit about how that shaped the book and you.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that I started my book probably a year and a half before October 7th. So when October 7th hit, it actually didn't change the message or the overall ideas of the book at all. It really was actually the same content. I was really writing about history, how Jewish identity had been shaped, and so October 7th was almost just like more data points for me, and it didn't really change it, believe it or not.
I'd like to go a little deeper to this present moment, but I'd like to first go to that college tour you took. So after October 7th, as you mentioned, you ended up on a college campus, and then you ended up doing this whole tour of college campuses. Tell us a little bit about what you saw and experienced on those American college campuses after October 7th.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I went to 27 college campuses after the 7th. And, the funny thing is, after that first campus I went to a year before the 7th, I had asked Hillel to set up a college tour for me. And they did. It was in August of 2023. They set it up. And it was due to start October 10th of 2023. So October 7th happens, and we're like texting, like, should I still go? I'm not sure. I did end up going. And I was just so utterly appalled by what I saw. I mean, I'm still shaken by it, like 2 years later. I think and I should be really clear, campuses are very diverse. So to say that campus is like X is a nonsensical statement. There are campuses that are great for Jewish kids, no anti-Semitism. There are ones that are terrible. I ended up going to a lot of the ones that were not great for obvious reasons. And at those campuses, you see that what I saw was that Israel has really been put in the same moral bucket as the KKK and the Nazi Party. So if I'm like, Rabbi Shulman, I'm a Nazi, but I'm a liberal Nazi. Or like, oh yeah, I'm in the KKK, but I'm not racist. I mean, come on, that's absurd, right? You can't have any connection with the Nazi Party or the KKK. Those are appalling entities. If Israel is in that bucket, then a student saying, well, wait a second, I'm a liberal Zionist. I actually don't agree with all of the policies of the Israeli government. I actually don't agree with this and that, but it sounds like I'm a liberal Nazi. And so I saw how kids were just being ostracized, right? I saw how kids were being harassed. I mean, it was just so shocking and appalling to me. And it wasn't, I think people have really got focused on the encampments and the protests, which obviously I was not a fan of. I actually think there was a much bigger, deeper problem that was much more systemic in the kind of hour-to-hour, day-to-day way that Israel was thought about and talked about and used as kind of the epitome of all evil. So I think even if you can get rid of the more obvious protests and disruptions, that kind of day-to-day atmosphere, like the air these kids breathe. I mean, I remember a girl telling me that her RA, who identified as a staunch anti-Zionist, would neither look at her nor speak to her. I just thought, like, this kid's a freshman. She's just a Jewish freshman, just kind of trying to make her way. And I just thought, like, is that even an incident? Like, how do you even report that? And is it one incident? Is it like, how do you even measure that kind of, it's almost like humidity. Like, you can start to try to measure humidity with a bucket, and then you kind of come up empty-handed and people think you're a little being crazy, but like you're sweating and suffocating and you're so uncomfortable. And that's what I think a lot of these campuses felt like to me.
Is there a particular story that really stuck with you from one of the campuses that you experienced?
I think it was like this collection of little moments. It was that RA, it was a student who told me that her TA had announced to her that he thought that Hamas should be running America. She just thought, like, that's just so shocking. I don't know what to do with that. Or the girl who told me that her professor announced to the class one morning that all Jews have the blood of all Palestinians on their hands. It's like, what are you, this idea that Israel kind of is a stand-in for all things evil. The fact that, like, one girl told me her graphic design professor every week would get up and rant about Israel. Another girl told me that her anthropology class, it was like theories of anthropology, and every week they were reading articles about, how bad Israel was. It was like, guys, this obsession, right? This is a very old thing, this obsession with Jews, and I found it really disturbing.
So if you were going to work backwards from what you saw on campus to sort of backwards design or think about how we should be preparing students in 2025 to go to campuses, what are your thoughts? I know you've been a big proponent in both your books that that we can't only myopically focus on religious school education to be the panacea for all Jewish education, that a lot happens in the home and so many other places. But what are your thoughts? You know, there's a number of parents in the room that have kids that are going to be going off to college, or currently kids that are in college, and I think there's a worriness that happens, and how do we turn that into some good preparation?
So I think, I think good Israel education is key. I think if we're going to teach our kids that Israel is a magical wonderland conceived in moonbeams and rainbows, and it's perfect and a utopia, we're setting them up for failure. I think it is so critical that, of course, we teach our kids that Israel is a miracle and that it's extraordinary. Of course, right? That's what I believe, and that's what I want our kids to understand. We also need to teach them that it's a country. Israel is a country. It was founded like many other countries in the 20th century. In fact, kind of like all countries, it was founded in violence, bloodshed. Countries are founded in violence, they're maintained in violence. Countries were founded in the mid-20th century in violence, bloodshed, war, and partition. And I think we need to normalize Israel. I think that so often on campuses, the idea is to denormalize Israel, to say that it's this original sin of the world, it's an abomination, it's appalling. And if our kids know, no, wait a second, it was founded like every single other country. Don't you tell me this is not normal. I think that we really need to make sure they understand that Israel is no worse than any other country in its founding story. I think that's critical. Second, I think they need a really solid Jewish education, because we focus so much on fighting anti-Semitism, which is great. But if you don't know anything about Jewish tradition, you are going to be useless fighting anti-Semitism. If someone tells you the Jewish God is violent and vengeful and Judaism is unspiritual and legalistic, if you know nothing about Jewish tradition, what are you going to say? My bubby makes good kugel? I mean, are you going to make some ethnic joke, right? If someone tells you Israel is a Nazi racist state and you don't know anything about Israeli history, what are you going to say? Are you going to be like, I love Tikkun Olam, right? When you have this kind of contentless Jewish identity, you can't fight anti-Semitism because you don't know what you're defending. You don't know what you're fighting for. So I think a really solid Jewish education is key. And that involves us as adults. The reality is that 10 years ago, I had to grow up. I had to become a Jewish adult. I wasn't one. Right? I had the education of a 12-year-old, which was minimal and kind of pathetic, and I had to do some work. Right? This is not a tradition where you take something into your heart and you're transformed. That's not what we're doing here. I know we think that because we're in a Christian country. We're a text-based tradition, right? Our tradition is based on thousands of years of text with profound wisdom about how to engage in our daily lives. And we actually have to learn that wisdom. We have to learn some of our history. We have to learn our traditions, and that takes work, right? You got to read a few books or listen to lectures or however you learn best. You have to do that work, and it's hard. As someone who had to do that work, I will tell you it took some effort. But there are great Intro to Judaism classes. There are great books you can read. It doesn't have to involve thousands of hours. I did the thousands of hours of work to write a couple of books that would kind of transmit the content in a way that was accessible, and many others have done that as well. So I think those are the things that we have to do, because a Hebrew school teacher can't make your kid Jewish in 2 hours a week. Mm-hmm. It's our job as adults, and it's hard, and I have so much empathy for all the adults like me who have to do that work.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a couple titles or recommendations that have been books that have really resonated or been very helpful for you in your journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think I wrote my first book because I found a lot of the intro books to be confusing. They were often written by rabbis who knew a lot about Judaism. So the first chapter would be Shabbat. And I was I'm sorry, where is the Judaism? Where is it written down? Who are Jews? They didn't really explain things well. But I do think Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, basically anything by him is excellent. Rabbi Joseph Telushkin has a wonderful 2-volume books of ethics where he divides up. He basically goes through a ton of Jewish texts but makes them very accessible, and he divides it up by topic. So if you want to learn about, okay, what does Judaism say about lying? You can just read the section about lying. So there are many, many titles like that.
Nice. Let's talk a little bit more about anti-Semitism. You offer several different frameworks in your book to help to understand anti-Semitism today. Can you share some of those with us?
Yeah. So I think, I think we struggle because we don't really understand what anti-Semitism is. Many of us think that it's a personal prejudice. Oh, Jews are dirty, cheap, crass. I don't want to marry one or have one in my country club. Sure, you can see some of that, but that's not really the type that I think many of us are confronting today. What we're confronting today is more of a kind of political anti-Semitism. It's like anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory. And the way the theory goes is that the Jews are the one thing standing in the way of the redemption of the world, as the journalist Haviv Rettiger puts it. Or another way to put it is, we, the majority, are engaged in this grand moral project, and the only thing stopping us are the Jews. So, back in the day, we, the Christians, are Christianizing the Roman Empire. What's stopping us? These Jews who won't convert. We, the communists, are bringing about the brotherhood of man and the grand revolution. What's stopping us? These capitalist, industrialist Jews. We, the Germans, are bringing about the great racially pure Aryan fatherland. Who is stopping us? These race-polluting Jews. Today, you see this in the US on both the right and the left. On the right, you hear people saying, we, white Christian Americans, are bringing back white Christian civilization to America. What's stopping us? These Jews who are importing black and brown immigrants to take the place of white people. This is the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. It is an absolutely insane lie. You can hear this on Tucker Carlson's show. This is very popular on the right. I don't know whether it's more racist or more anti-Semitic, but it is really ugly. On the left, you have people saying, we are bringing about this great revolution in anti-racism and anti-colonialism. The only thing stopping us, these racist, colonialist Zionists, which is a polite way of saying Jews. So you're seeing this on both the right and the left today. It's the idea that whatever the worst thing in a society is at the moment, that really is the Jew. The second thing is there's two kinds of anti-Semitism, and Dara Horn writes about this very well in her book, People Love Dead Jews. There's the kind we learned about in Holocaust education, which is the Jews are bad, nothing they can do to be good, we will kill them. That's pogroms and the Holocaust. But there's another kind, which is the Jews are indeed bad, but there is something they can do to save themselves. And that something is that they can reject whatever it is about Jewish tradition that we, the majority, find disgusting. So back in the day, it was, reject Jewish religion, convert to Christianity, and then maybe you'll be saved. Maybe, we'll see. Maybe we'll let you live. In my parents' and grandparents' generation, it was change your name, change your nose, don't be so, quote, Jewy, be a little more waspy, be more classy, and then maybe you can join my country club and marry my daughter. Maybe, we'll see. Today, the problem isn't the Jews' religion or our names or our noses, the problem is our nation. Today, the demand, especially on college campuses, is reject your ancestral homeland, and then you're acceptable, and then you're saved. So you often hear, I would hear these college students, these Jewish students, actually kind of articulating what was almost a Christian conversion narrative, where they'd be like, growing up, my rabbi and my parents, they told me Israel was great, but then I got to college, and I learned that it's a genocidal apartheid state. I had an epiphany. I saw the light, and I took anti-racism and anti-colonialism into my heart, and now I am saved. Their classmates are like, now you are saved. Now you are a good and acceptable Jew. Heartbreaking to watch. The third thing I'll say, and final thing I'll say, is that one of the reasons why I think many of us are confused is that anti-Semitism gets upgrades. So the medieval Christian clergyman, he did not think himself a bigot. Right? He had centuries worth of very sophisticated theology saying that Jews killed Jesus, that they were devilish and depraved and carnal. He was the elite of his society, and he was not some dumb bigot. He was elite and had a lot of knowledge, so that made sense, and everyone thought that was very sophisticated. Several hundred years later, the modern enlightened European gentleman who's attended the university, he would look at that clergyman and say, oh, what a superstitious idiot, right? That religious stuff, of course the Jews didn't kill Jesus, but actually what we understand today is that they are racially inferior. We have, quote, science that says that the Jews are racially inferior, so that's really the problem with the Jews. And everyone said, well, that's very sophisticated, right? That's scientific, that's a respectable gentleman. Okay, anti-Semitism has gotten an upgrade. Today, no one is going to say Jews killed Jesus or that their religion is bad. No one is going to say that Jews are racially bad. But today, what the problem is the Jews nation, right? Today, we have very sophisticated people, professors, very elite people talking about anti-Zionism and promulgating all this very sophisticated sounding language, and that's the new upgrade. And the problem is when you're in the upgrade, you don't think you're an anti-Semite, because you are the sophisticated, impressive, tolerant, well-respected person. And this is well-respected stuff in the moment. But when we look back, it's very obvious that it was just anti-Semitism. And I think it's obvious to many of us today that a lot of what we're seeing is anti-Semitism. And I think it will probably be more obvious 10 or 20 or 30 years from now. But because we are in this upgrade, I think a lot of people are having trouble seeing it.
Can you talk a little bit about that space? Sometimes it's hard to tell, as you talk about in your book, the difference between what's shame and what's maybe criticism of the current government in Israel, right? That it's a country, right? And there's things that we love about any country and its government, and maybe less so. But one of the things we all see so much, especially in young people, but I think across the board, is that confusion about how can I be critical of Netanyahu or the government? But where's that line where it's about sort of internalizing the erasure, the shame of sort of like, the Jewish state, the Jewish people don't deserve to exist, right? How do how do people navigate that messy middle?
So I think a good way to do that is to substitute for the word Jew the name of some other minority, and then things start to become very clear. So when I hear on college campuses kids saying, from water to water, Palestine shall be Arab, or Jews are Nazis, and saying, well, that's just criticism. Okay, well, if a Jewish student said from water to water, Israel shall be Jewish, or Palestinians are terrorists, is that criticism, or is that just ugly racist eliminationism? I think it's ugly racist eliminationism. So it's actually pretty clear once you substitute another minority, and it kind of breaks my heart that we have to do that. I would hear these poor college students saying, well, my campus isn't that bad because I can wear my Jewish star. I'm like, oh, great. Well, I'm going to wear my T-shirt that says Israel on it. And they're like, oh, no, please don't do that. And I'm like, okay, help me out. If a black student wore a T-shirt that said Black Lives Matter and their classmates harassed them, what would you call that? They were like, well, that's racism. Good. Queer student wears a great gay pride T-shirt, gets harassed. What's that? And that's homophobia. I'm like, okay, we're so close to Israel. No, but that's anti-Zionism. I'm like, okay, take a breath. Your Chinese American classmate wears a shirt that says China and she gets harassed. They're like, oh, yeah, that's wrong. Why is that? Because even if your classmates knew that China was currently interning 1 million Muslim Uyghurs and subjecting them to human rights abuses, I'm guessing your classmates wouldn't look at her and say, oh, she must love abusing Uyghurs. No, they're probably going to look at her and say, oh, she must have family there, heritage there, maybe she's studying Chinese. If they're not going to give you the benefit of the doubt, that's a kind of a problem, right? If you can't do that, that's a problem. And I think at the end of the day, if you want to criticize, please go ahead. That's like the national pastime of Israel, is criticizing Israel. It's the national pastime of Jews. But there's a big difference between slurs and unfounded accusations and actual criticism. And I don't think it's that hard when we start to kind of substitute other groups in to decide where the line is. So, I always tell them substitute another group in. If they're criticizing other countries but not calling for their elimination, and they're only calling for the elimination of Israel, that should probably be something that instructs you that maybe we've crossed a line to anti-Semitism.
Let's focus a little bit on solutions for a moment. Not that we imagine you have a magic wand to solve anti-Semitism in this country, if only. But what are your thoughts on solutions to, how do we go about fighting anti-Semitism today?
Yeah, and before I say that, I think because college anti-Semitism is so personal to me, I tend to get really focused on that, and I worry I almost focused a little too much on the left-wing anti-Semitism in my book. But this is very much a problem on the right as well. And whenever I hear people saying, oh, it's the other side, that's the problem, as my friend Dara Horn says, if you think there are sides, you are actually wrong. Right, both sides are actually saying very similar things. When I hear the kind of populism of the right, which is saying a small group of very powerful, very depraved elites is in a conspiracy to harm you and your family, just like the distance between elites and Jews is like a millimeter, right? That is actually the same structure as anti-Semitism, and Tucker Carlson has made that leap. Many people on the right are making that leap. So, as much as I'm personally offended by the anti-Semitism on the left, it's very much on the right as well, so I want to be fair-minded about that because it is across the spectrum. In terms of solutions, people often ask me, like, okay, how can we fight anti-Semitism? And they flagellate. It's like, we're screwing it up. If we just had the right PR campaign, the right tweet, we would fight anti-Semitism, but we're so bad at this. And I think that is adorable. I appreciate the ambition. But guys, there are 16 million of us in the world. That's with an M. Okay, that is the size of the 5th largest city in China. Okay, we're a Chinese city. And the idea that we are going to shape what 8 billion people think, half of whom subscribe to religious traditions that really have anti-Judaism kind of baked into their DNA. The idea that we're going to change that is, I think, a little bit, it's a little overly ambitious. The reality is Jews generally don't control when anti-Semitism waxes and wanes. Anti-Semitism tends to explode when people are feeling insecure and they kind of go back to their old habit of blaming us, right? A plague arises, they get mad. An economic downturn happens, they get mad. We're in a moment of globalization where there's a lot of insecurity. Guess what? People are mad again. So I think that, the idea that we're going to fight anti-Semitism, I think there are definitely things we can do. We can educate. There are certainly things we can do, and I don't mean to be negative about that. But I also would just suggest shifting some of our energy into not just bailing out the flood with buckets, but building an ark, like really strengthening ourselves and our communities. Because I actually think one of the best ways to fight anti-Semitism is to be proud, passionate, committed, dedicated Jews, and to show that to the world. Right, to really live proud, devoted Jewish lives with strong communities like this one. I think kind of being models for what it is to be a really great Jew, I think that can actually in some ways help anti-Semitism. And when we're learned, when we know our traditions, when we know what we're fighting for, then actually it's a lot easier to fight back against anti-Semitism, because when people say these lies to us, we're like, not true, let me tell you the truth. So I think that just being proud, passionate Jews is incredibly important right now. And I will say, my friend Dara Horn, who's a great author, she actually has a new foundation called the Tell Foundation, where her theory of the case is Holocaust education isn't enough. Teaching young people that Jews are people who are meant to be killed is probably not totally ideal. And so she really wants to educate about Jewish civilization. So she is really bringing lessons into schools to teach young people about the ideas that Jews brought to the Western world and how they shaped Western civilization. And that, I think, is really exciting.
That's great. You quote her a couple times in the book, and she is a really powerful thinker. You quote her when she writes, "Judaism has always been uncool, going back to its origins as the planet's only monotheism. Uncoolness is pretty much Judaism's brand, and you urge us to follow this, to lean into this, to be uncool Jews." Like, what exactly does it mean to be an uncool Jew, and why is that important right now?
So this is, to be a Jew is to be different. That has always been, I think, one of our main value propositions to the world. Like, we came about in a time of paganism, and we said, no, actually, monotheism. No, actually, people are not meant to be just slaves and just like objects. Like, every human being is created in the image of God. Not a popular idea at the time. However, that is now the idea that underlies democracy, liberalism, civil rights law. Like, that is a really important idea that we brought to the world. It wasn't popular. So much of Judaism is countercultural, and I'll give two specific examples. The first one is what Jewish moral vision is. You hear this old lie, it's quite anti-Semitic, that says that, while Christianity is a religion of love, Judaism is a religion of law. It's legalistic, it's nitpicky, it's weedy and unspiritual. And that's just such an ugly lie, because if you actually study Jewish law, you realize that it articulates a very high bar for love, and it teaches us how to meet that. And it does it through its particular weedy, nitpicky shape. I'll give a couple of examples. Jewish law tells us that if we go into a store and we have no intention of buying something, we shouldn't ask the shopkeeper the price of an item, because doing so wastes their time. It gets their hopes up unfairly. We're also told that if we loan someone money and we see them coming down the street a few weeks later and we know they're still really financially struggling, we should actually try to avoid them. We should actually walk the other way, because if you run into them, you're just going to embarrass them. And you could say, oh, that's so legalistic, that's so nitpicky. Why can't you just say, care for the poor, be nice to workers? But the weediness is the point. What Jewish law is trying to do with all of these hyper-specific little scenarios is they're trying to inculcate this exquisite sensitivity to the needs and dignity and humanity and vulnerability to every single person who crosses your path. So all those little hyper-specific examples, it's like when you go to the eye doctor and they click the vision machine and they're making your vision crisper and crisper so you can see what's before you more clearly. That is what Jewish law is doing to your moral vision. It is making it crisper and crisper and urging you to focus in on this particular person. Let me see them in their fullest humanity. This is the exact opposite of what is now the kind of this awful modern way of thinking, which says, no. You just divide people up into two crude and dehumanizing categories: powerful, powerless, oppressor, oppressed, and you hate or love them accordingly. That's it. That is like taking the vision machine and clicking it backwards to make things blurrier and blurrier until all you can see are two blobs, and you can't even see them well. And so I think that the Jewish moral vision that rejects that, that is so radical and countercultural, and we need more of that, especially on college campuses. The second example I'll give is that, our modern secular ethic is very much one that rejects things like aging, illness, dying, grief, mourning. The secular world is like, oh, no, run like hell from that, right? Hospitals are creepy, dead bodies are gross, aging is disgusting, just inject some Botox, inject some chemicals, send a text, send some flowers, be done with it, run away. Jewish tradition says, no, you run right up to those places. You get your butt to the hospital bedside and you sit with that person. You get yourself to that funeral, to that shiva, and you sit with those mourners, and it might be uncomfortable. You are right with them. That body, you, the community, you lovingly prepare that body for burial. And, Judaism, what Jewish tradition is doing is it's pushing us into these thin spaces where the boundaries between life and death and heaven and earth thin out. And we are disoriented in these spaces, right? These are liminal, kind of like scary spaces. And what Jewish law says is that we need to be held and accompanied in these spaces. And it is our job to be with people, radically present in these spaces. And that is just, it's so tremendously countercultural. That is something we bring. And the final example I'll give is that, I think modern social media discourse is just so extreme, right? It's like I'm on the right side of history and you're on the wrong side of history. I am good and you are evil. Whereas what Jewish law tells us is that actually thought operates in polarities. You are required to hold two opposite poles. You're required to hold two opposing truths and wrestle with them. So the Torah tells us no fewer than 36 times to love the stranger, love the non-Jew, love the outsider, welcome that person, care for that person because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. It also tells us be wary of Amalek. Never forget Amalek, blot out Amalek's name. That outsider came to the back of your tribe and attacked you. That outsider was dangerous. So we're being told, be open-hearted, be compassionate, love the stranger, and be wary. There are people out there who want to kill you. And I see so many people clinging to one or the other of those poles. That is not Jewish. Judaism demands that we actually wrestle with both of those. We're told that you're supposed to praise a bride on her wedding night. And our ancient rabbis say, well, what if you actually don't think she's praiseworthy? And they really wrestle with that. It's like, well, but you don't want to lie, so you've got to be honest. But you also don't want to be unkind. So they're wrestling with honesty and kindness. You have to deal with both. And I think that our discourse today would be so much more nuanced and thoughtful and humane if it were more Jewish. And I think that these are these countercultural radical ideas that we bring to the world that are important not just for Jews, but for all civilization. And I think that is why it is so important that we remain Jews, that we don't just become anti-Semites, but that we are also proud, learned, committed Jews.
Thank you. Thank you. And in so many ways, you are like the poster child for that movie or that series. I'm going to ask Sarah one more question, and then we'll open it up to a few audience questions. Tell us what's next for you.
So I'm going to be promoting this book for a while. It's kind of something I really want to devote myself to full time. But I'm starting a rabbinical program in January, which is exciting.
I'm sorry.
It's with the Hartman Institute, which if you don't know about it, it's an amazing institution located in both the U.S., in New York City, and in Jerusalem. They have extraordinary scholars, extraordinary learning, and they do a summer program each summer in Jerusalem that lay leaders, rabbis, Jews of all kinds come and spend a week in Jerusalem. It's such an amazing place. They have classes and lectures and events that are both online and in person, and they've started this pluralistic rabbinical school for students who are a little bit older, people who've had careers, and it's part-time, it's accessible, so I'm going to be doing that. And I resisted it at first when they came to me, because I was like, no, my whole shtick is I'm a Jew just like you, I'm so relatable. And the head of it was like, Sarah, stop, right? Like you're not relatable anymore. Like that's enough.
You've read too much.
Right, exactly. He's like, that's not true. And he just said, look, if you want to be speaking about these things, like why not have the training and the title of rabbi? And I realized, like, he's right. You have this credential and I don't. You have this systemic, deep Jewish learning that I've sort of cobbled together, and I'm missing things. And so I realized it was a great next move, and I'm very excited about it.
So what would that rabbi part of you say to the 12-year-old you that just wasn't, or 18-year-old Jew that wasn't into Judaism? And what would What would that 18-year-old Jew think of this new one?
That 18-year-old Jew would be so stunned. I don't even think she'd be able to process it. I think what I would say to her, I think I'd just do a text study with her. I'd say, like, listen, here's some wisdom that your tradition has that's relevant to your life. And you haven't seen this because you were kind of engaging in this very edited form of Judaism that was a result of persecution. But there's actually a whole tradition that's here for you to reclaim. And so I'd want to give her a taste of what I found later in life. That would be the goal. And I should say I'm not going to be a congregational rabbi. I'm going to keep writing books because I think being a congregational rabbi is the most challenging job. I am in awe of Rabbi Shulman. The many, many skills that it takes to be a pulpit rabbi are mind-boggling.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing and good luck. We have a real rabbi shortage in this country, and we do. And
it's true.
There's a lot of pulpits that are empty, and I know you don't want to go in the pulpit, but I think there's these are tough times, and there's a real need for Jewish leadership, strong professional leadership, lay leadership. It's really important. Thank you.
The suspense is kind of killing me here.
All right, great. Okay, let's start with a young person in the room. So this person says, I'm a senior in high school, and I've dealt with some real blatant, frequent, and normalized anti-Semitism. So first of all, I want to say I'm sorry to hear that. She says that perhaps she thinks that one of the reasons she's really dealt with that is a lack of Jewish education that addresses this, and also misinformation online. Do you have advice on how I might work to educate my peers also in productive ways?
First of all, that breaks my heart to hear that, because I, having grown up in the 80s and 90s, I didn't have to deal with that, and it breaks my heart that any young person does. So I'm so sorry you have to deal with that. So I think the first thing I'd say is it shouldn't have to be your responsibility to educate your peers, right? This is something that the school should be doing, that their parents should be doing. But I think that one way to educate them, if you want to, and I don't think you have to, is just to share with them what being Jewish means to me. And if you feel comfortable, share with them why what they're saying is hurtful, right? Why what they're saying is actually based on some ignorance. I think that's really, that can sometimes people do these things out of just ignorance or because they heard it somewhere else and they're just repeating it. But I want to say something deeper, because I think, something I saw on college campuses, which was quite extraordinary, was I really thought that these college students were going to be like their peers. We're going to be screaming slogans and canceling each other and shouting each other down. But they weren't. They were actually, these Jewish students were actually really thoughtful and nuanced and very careful with their speech. And I realized that because they had so often been challenged by their peers, because they'd experienced so much negativity from their peers, they really learned to actually think for themselves. Because they knew, wait a second, that's not true. They learned to actually marshal facts and make arguments. They actually got an education. And what I want to say to this young person is what you're experiencing is unacceptable, and it's unfair, and it's wrong, and I'm so sorry. And I also want you to know that I think it is actually, you're learning from this and you're growing from this, as painful as it is. I saw these young people gaining in resilience. I saw them kind of learning the lesson that Jews throughout history have learned, which is that the mob is often wrong. The majority is often wrong. Our kind of different way of thinking has been such a blessing to the world, and it's often been a result of us being excluded. I also would say to young people, if you're being pushed out by your classmates or ostracized by your classmates, you can do what Jews in this country have always done, which is start your own institutions. But I always say to college students, if the climate club won't let you be in, you start your own climate change club, and you make it welcome to every student of every background, not just Jews, but anyone who really cares about climate change and doesn't want to just sit around hating Zionists. You make it radically inclusive and welcoming, and you make that the best club that your campus has ever seen. You make it so outstanding that everyone is going to want to join it. That's what Jews have done in this country. When people excluded us from their law firms, their hospitals, their universities, we built our own, and they were phenomenal. And we made them welcome to anyone who wanted to join, and everyone wanted to join because they were excellent. And I think that is something that, that is a way of claiming your agency. When you can't control people around you, you can control yourself. right? You can create. You don't have to destroy, you can create. And I think that that can be a constructive way of dealing with anti-Semitism. But I just want to end by saying you shouldn't have to, and I'm really sorry. I would also say tell an adult at the school, tell your parents, like, you shouldn't have to deal with this alone. There should be people who are helping you and supporting you, and it's their job to deal with this. Report it to ADL.
Thank you. This isn't a question, but it's worth reading. Someone wrote, wanted to share that my daughter heard you at Syracuse University and found you very inspirational. Thank you for visiting.
Oh my gosh,
Isn't that nice?
I love that. I remember
think
that
it's signed
visit.
by your mom, but I'm not sure. No, just kidding.
That was a great visit. The students there were phenomenal.
Here's a tough question. Have you had the opportunity to have conversations with anti-Zionist Jews? And have you found any place for discussion?
I have, and yeah, I mean, not specifically them, but I have. I think the problem is that we just have a very different understanding of history. I think that they often have what I personally consider is a very idealized version of history, where it's like this kind of story that Jews were living beautifully and peacefully in diaspora and having these lovely Jewish communities that were so unique and beautiful. And we were, right? We were, that's great. But people were also constantly trying to kill us. And I think they tend to kind of leave that part out, which I find a little bit disingenuous. And maybe sometimes it's just because they don't necessarily know. But they'll sometimes say things like, well, Israel was really founded just because of the Holocaust. There's a little bit of ignorance there where, yes, 2/3 of European Jews were wiped out in the Holocaust, but 850,000 Jews also had to flee from Arab lands because they were persecuted. 650,000 of them fled to Israel. 2 million Russian Jews fled persecution in Russia, 1 million of them to Israel. 100,000 Ethiopian Jews fled persecution in Ethiopia, nearly all of them to Israel. And like that list goes on. Those are just the biggest numbers. And I think this idea that Jewish statelessness is beautiful and wonderful, I just don't buy it, right? I feel like we did run that experiment for 2,000 years, and I think many of our ancestors paid with their lives. And there's almost some idea that I hear them say that like they're so appalled by the idea of power, right? There's sort of an idea almost that power itself is immoral. And with state power comes responsibility. Comes violence, comes bloodshed. That's the reality of having a state and a military. And I think there's some disappointment for some Jews because we can no longer be pure, right? We can no longer be just victims. And when you're just a victim, then you're blameless. And I think in many circles that young people travel today, being a victim is like the best thing you can be, right? Like that's what you want to be. So I get the yearning for that. But I don't know. I think there's a lot of privilege that comes with that yearning. And I see oftentimes when I talk to young people who are first-generation American Jews or second-generation, they have no patience for that because they're like, no, I experienced that persecution. Like, this is not fun. This is not beautiful. This is really problematic. And look, at the same time, do I share their critiques of the current Israeli government? I do. I'm very, very critical of the current Israeli government, of many of the policies, of many of the ideologies. I mean, I will talk your ear off about that. And I'm a Zionist. Just like I'm a really proud, patriotic American, and I happen to agree very strongly with the current president. It's not hard for me to hold both of those things, and I think oftentimes many students who identify with as anti-Zionists, they've decided that Zionism is Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, Bibi occupation. And they're like, well, that's bad, so I'm an anti-Zionist. That's not Zionism, right? The fact that that's what Zionism's been defined as is just, it's a mistake and it's a lie. But I understand that if you define Zionism that way, then maybe you're going to say, well, okay, then I guess I have to be like Peter Beinart and say one state, and that's kind of, I'm an anti-Zionist, but those are not the two choices. I really try to tell these young people, no, there's another choice. There is believing that we need a Jewish state because we experienced statelessness and it went badly, and we can be very critical of the current government and many policies and want this state to look very differently. So that's what I try to tell these students, but they are steeped in social media, and I think I also, the young person mentioned online, I think that is something that we as old people do not understand. I have so many parents who come to me and they say, what did I do wrong? I sent my kid to day school, we did Shabbat every weekend, I love being Jewish. I tried to teach them that, but now they're an anti-Zionist. What did I do wrong? And I just want to hug them and say, you did nothing wrong. Like, they have a phone. And all of the great Jewish content you gave them cannot compete with 16 hours a day of videos of admittedly horrible footage, right? War is horrible. But if that's all they see all day long, that's going to overwhelm any rational thought. And so I think in many ways our phones are really kind of infiltrating our young people's minds, and that's a big challenge.
Thank you. There's a couple questions here. People are interested a little bit more in your background. This one comes from a young person. They write, I am 10 years old. I have also, thank you for writing this question.
Thank you.
I have also experienced anti-Semitism. I'm wondering how old you were when you first experienced anti-Semitism. And they write, I was in 3rd grade when I did, which is, first of all, it just breaks your heart to read this question. But tell us a little bit about your own upbringing and pivotal experiences around both anti-Semitism, but just also Judaism a little more.
I mean, this utterly breaks my heart. I am so sorry that this young person has experienced this. And the truth is, I didn't experience anti-Semitism because I grew up in a suburb of Boston in the 80s and 90s. My town was probably 15% Jewish, 20% we had high holy days off of public school. It was an amazing place to be a Jew. And, I'm often reminded by my friends who grew up in other parts of the country that was not every Jew's experience. And so I realized that was quite a privilege that I had. I mean, I almost can't think of, I remember maybe one time in 8th grade, a kid said something to me about being a Jew, and I remember just telling him off in front of the entire homeroom. And I remember my homeroom teacher standing at the back going, yeah! I mean, it was almost like, it was so rare, and it was almost comical because it wasn't, it was almost not serious because that was the water that we swam in back then. I think the one thing I would say is anti-Semitism is terrible, and it's also something that connects us back to generations and generations of people who survived it, right? Who built thriving communities, who didn't blame other people for their problems, right? Who actually took responsibility for themselves and said okay, we're being discriminated against, we're experiencing anti-Semitism, we're not gonna do acts of violence, we're not gonna hate other people, we're not gonna come up with a victim ideology. We're gonna say no, we're better than this, right? We are Jews. We are a people with a mission in the world. We are people who have a proud tradition. We have knowledge, we have wisdom, we have beautiful rituals, we have a strong community, and our ancestors leaned into being Jewish, so many of them. So I think, as painful as this is, we kind of had this vacation from history that I think many of us took for granted. And I remember being in Israel very soon after October 7th and meeting this really wonderful young man on a kibbutz who had lost his brother on October 7th. And I remember as we parted ways, I remember thinking for so many years, I thought that I was an American of the Jewish faith, and he thought that he was an Israeli, but I think actually we're both Jews. We actually haven't escaped history. And so I say to this young person, as painful as this is, you are part of this incredible people. You have the most extraordinary privilege to be part of this people who, birthed ideas like every human being being infinitely valuable, who birthed the 6-day work week, who birthed so many of the greatest ideas and inventions and human beings. And it's such a privilege to be part of this people. And this discrimination is the price that we pay for this, and it's not fair, but man, how lucky are we to be Jews?
I grew up in Seattle, and I think had a very similar kind of sheltered experience in that respect. And then recently, the synagogue that I grew up at was graffitied and vandalized, and said all sorts of awful things about how you've killed so many people, genocide, and it was for me one of the things I really it hit me is just how different today is than that moment. Even though this is such a long existing issue.
And I think this is in many ways what has given us our compassion for others. It's what has given us our ability to think differently. So as awful and unfair and wrong as it is, it's also given us some superpowers, and I'm not rationalizing it or justifying it, but I don't want us to just feel like victims. I want us to say this is happening, but here is what we're gonna do with it. And that's the key to surviving.
Yeah, thank you. What do you suggest we do, this person asks, with the disengaged Jew, or the Jew that finds being different is bad?
So I think so often our instinct with disengaged Jews is to be like, I'll bring them to a Kabbalat Shabbat service and they'll fall in love with it and then they'll be Jewish. Or like, I'll bring them to Shabbat dinner and then they'll be Jewish. Oftentimes, they'll just be uncomfortable, right? They'll be like in the service, they don't know what's happening, it's confusing, or they're at the dinner and people are like washing their hands without soap and they're like, do we not believe in the germ theory of disease? What's happening? Like, it's, I think we so often think of connecting to Judaism through ritual. And if you do connect that way, that's amazing. But if you're someone like me who grew up without any of that ritual, it's just embarrassing. You just feel like a bad Jew and an imposter and uncomfortable. So I would suggest going to those disengaged Jews and saying like, hey, I heard this amazing ancient story that I think has a really beautiful moral and it's Jewish, or like, hey, I just read this like amazing piece of Jewish wisdom that helped me deal with this situation with my colleague. Do you want to hear about it? I think oftentimes sharing really powerful Jewish wisdom or insights is helpful because when people say to me, oh, Jews don't want to study, come on, you're such an egghead and a nerd, normal Jews aren't like you. I'm like, sorry, have you been to a Jew's house lately? They're filled with books. Rarely about Judaism, but Jews read books, Jews listen to TED Talks, Jews travel, Jews go to lectures. These are all ways you can learn about Judaism. And I think if Jews knew that all this wisdom were there, they would want to be exposed to this. So I think exposing them to some of the wisdom can make them feel intrigued and think like, oh, maybe there's more.
I'm going to ask one more question so that we can we know that just honoring that it's getting a little bit late, and then there's going to be an opportunity afterwards for purchasing books, signing books, and talking more to Sarah. She'll hang out for a while. Here's a little bit of a different question, kind of speaking to the outside of the Jewish community. This person asks, do you speak at churches? This person wonders, I wonder if you're preaching to the choir here, but I wonder if it would be what it would be like to speak to non-Jews, to educate those a little bit more about what you've shared in your book.
Yeah, it's funny, I probably am preaching to the choir here, but it's amazing how few Jews actually know about the history of Christian anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism and how much it's shaped us as American Jews. But I actually do really want to speak to Christians, and I'm on a couple of Christian podcasts, and I'm trying to think, and we're trying to get into Christian media because I do think there is a big audience there of people who would be very open to this, and people of all backgrounds who I think want to be allies with Jews, want to fight anti-Semitism, which is why I'm trying to do more kind of mainstream media as well. But I think it's a great point, and I think it is really important to reach people outside of rooms like these where you all are probably agreeing with me, right? So with lots of what I say, and that's great, but that's not the point. The point is to persuade people who don't agree. So I think, and also to empower people who do agree with lots of tools so that we can go out and bring a message and try to change people's minds. So I agree with that, and I am trying to reach audiences beyond Jews for sure.
Great. Well, let's give a big round of applause for Sarah.
Much.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry I couldn't get to all the questions or we'd be here late because Jews are really good at asking questions, and we're really open to questions, but I also understand that not everyone wants this to also be a Slichot program well into the night. So Sarah will be available outside to sign books. If you bought a book and it's not signed, you can bring it back there and have it signed. Share it with your friends. It's a really wonderful read. And again, it's been really nice being in conversation with you.
Thank you so much. Such a joy. Thank you for having me.